Hey, welcome back to all my friends to the place where the fun never ends. I think that was part of a song back in the day. If it is, my girls will probably tell me. A lot of our interaction is movie quotes and song lyrics, so we have a good time with it. But we're out here in the shop today. We got the fire going because it's a little chilly outside. Don't have my shop coffee because I already had that in the house. But my honey wants a top to her current hearth, to our kind of fireplace thing she has in the living room, and I'll show you a picture of that. So she wants a topper that goes on that makes it a little bit wider and a little bit deeper, because she puts her Christmas village up there every holiday. So we're going to make her a hearth to go on her hearth. And I have some old barn wood that we had out in the barn. This is what we got here. It's some old lap siding, and it's real rustic. And I'm going to tell you ahead of time, this is not going to be a piece of fine furniture. So you're going to see me do a lot of stuff that you would do differently. And in fact, it's stuff that I would probably do differently too if I was building a piece of fine furniture. But my wife likes things rustic, just like her men. So that's the way she's going to get it. So we got these boards. This hearth, I've already measured, needs to be 6 feet long and 19 inches wide. And we can't quite get that out of 2 of these pieces of lap siding. So we're going to have to use 3. And we're going to rip it down to get rid of some of the real ugly pieces of it. And by ugly, I mean twisted, because I don't mind the knots and such. So we're going to get the table saw set up, and we're going to trim some of this up to get 3 good pieces that are going to give us our 19-inch width. And then this piece of 2x6 here, we're going to use to make kind of a trim or border underneath that will fit over the existing edges of the hearth. So I'm going to get the table saw set up, and we're going to start ripping this big stuff down. So I'm setting my fence to however much I want to cut off each individual board. I'm going to try to lose this really big through knot. And then we're going to need about 6.5 inches of all these boards. So that still gives me plenty in here to play with. And a couple of the boards I may be able to get more than 6 inches out. Whenever you set your rip fence, unless you got a really hot rod setup, you're going to have to measure at the front of the blade and the back of the blade to make sure you're right, because, like I said, unless you got one of them really super expensive rip fences, they don't line up perfectly. So we're going to get this one run through. All right, we got our first board cut. Always make sure you're using one of these if you're using a table saw. My brother learned a lesson the hard way the other day. He cut his thumb off using a skill saw. But that gave us a nice, clean, straight edge here. We're going to look over these other boards and find out what we want to cut off, what we want to save. And I'll do the final cut on the other side of the boards later, so I can make sure that we have the width that we need for all 3 boards. But I'm going to get these other 2 cut, and we'll come back. All right, we got all of these boards trimmed off one side, and that gives us a pretty good edge on the one side. And now we're going to come back and we're going to cut the lap off of the other side. So we've set our fence at 6 3/8, and 3 times 6 3/8 will give us just a little bit over 19 inches. So that's where we'll want to be with that. So we're going to run all 3 of these through again to true them up just a little bit more, and then we can start thinking about fastening them together. Alright, we got all 3 of our boards trued up. We're going to keep this knot here and this knot here, but this is the end we want close to square. The ends weren't cut perfectly because I cut them with a skill saw, but we've got them real close to where we can just do a really fine cut on this end to square it up. And then we put all the waste on that side. So we had a little crack on stuff on the end of this board, so all of this is the waste material down here that's going to get cut off. So we're going to use some biscuits to not so much join these together, but just to keep them aligned. The joints are pretty good, and if you were doing like furniture and stuff, you could run these through a joiner and really true that edge up. But we're not wanting to get that crazy. The only thing I'm using the biscuits for is to keep the boards in line like that, not so much to keep this edge super tight. So that's what we're going to do next. We'll put a few biscuits down each board and we'll show you how that works. So what we've gone down every gap and we've made marks across. And all that's going to do is to keep our current alignment that we have, and it marks the center of where the biscuits are going to go. And I did about every foot or so, and then I measured we're pretty close to where we were going to cut off, which will be over here somewhere, and then we put a biscuit down on the ends down here. So let me get that biscuit joiner out. We'll start cutting biscuits. So if you were a fan of New Yankee Workshop when you were a kid or a young adult, you've seen a biscuit joiner before, but if not, we'll show you what it is. These are our biscuits. This is a number 20 biscuit, and I got just over what I need to do this job. I'm going to have to replenish my supply. And all that is like a wooden football shaped disc. And then this machine cuts the slot. You'll see when you push this thing forward, let me see if I can do that and show you the teeth there. So when you set this against the wood and you push it forward, that little blade comes out and cuts your biscuit hole. So it sits sideways like this, and then you turn it on and you push it in and it cuts the slot. And then you watch here in the middle to make sure that you're lined up with your mark in your wood. And then when you do the corresponding side, you do this side, you do that side, it makes the biscuit right where you need it, the slot. So we're going to cut some biscuit slots. When you're cutting these biscuits, you want to make sure the board all the way down and your biscuit joiner is sitting flush on the surface, and that'll line your slot up perfectly. You might be able to see these slots aren't It's perfectly in the middle, but that doesn't matter if they're all cut at the same height. So we'll turn this board back around so we don't lose our orientation. Now all of these slots are directly across from each other. So when we put a biscuit in it, we'll put a little of our expanding Gorilla Glue on that biscuit. Make sure your slot is cleaned out. And that biscuit fits in there like that. And your corresponding board goes just like that. And then we'll squeeze that just a little bit with a clamp, but not too much. And all that does is align us this direction. Okay, so we're going to start slipping these biscuits in and getting this thing lined up and put together. And believe me, I know you woodworking guys are just appalled at my stunning lack of surface preparation here. But be kind. We're not building a clock, and this has to be rustic or my wife's not going to like it. So be gentle with me. I know what you're thinking. I always feel the same way when I watch people, but this is going to be what we designed it to be. This is the glue we're using. This stuff expands as it cures and fills any voids that are left. So it works really well for imperfect projects like we're doing right here. So I'll set the camera up and I'll show you what we do. We just put a little bit of glue on those biscuits on either side and shove these boards together. All right, we got our clamps on, and I know some of you are also wondering why didn't I put glue all along all the edges. And the only thing I'm worried about is why I put the clamps on is when that glue expands, pushing this wood apart as it pushes on those biscuits. So that's really the only reason I'm putting clamps on here. Again, I don't care if the seam is perfect, even though it looks pretty darn good the way it is now. And it probably would have glued up okay. But we're going to be putting a frame underneath this thing, which is also going to hold everything together. I mean, this wood's got boards have cups in them and everything else. So it's going to be really, really less than perfect. It's not even flat. As you can see, I put a clamp on opposite corners just to kind of hold it flat while the glue dries. But once we get the frame on there, it's going to take a lot of that out. So we're not terribly worried about it. But we're going to let this sit for a while until that glue sets. I think it's about an hour or so, but it's a little chilly out here, even with the wood stove going. So we'll make sure whatever glue squeezes out is cured before we pull these clamps on and move any further forward. However, we may start cutting the framework, but I'll probably wait because I'm using the table saw for a work table now. So we'll see you back in a bit. I thought I'd show you while we wait. They also make a mini biscuit joiner. This is actually the first one I purchased because back in the day I couldn't afford nicer stuff. Even though the big one I have is not very nice, I got it at Harbor Freight. But this one actually makes slots for 3 different size biscuits. So you just set the depth of the biscuit joiner, and you can use whatever size biscuits, 1, 2, or 3 that these come in. But these work good for like picture frames and small items like that, keeping everything aligned. You can see here how that Gorilla Glue squeezes out and expands. We only had it on that biscuit, and it squeezed all the way through that biscuit slot and then out through the wood. So that whole biscuit slot is full of glue, and it's going to harden like that. And I've just been coming down with a scraper and scraping this stuff out as it comes out, because it's much easier now than when this stuff hardens. It gets really hard. Well, I tell you what, 2 days away from December, and we're having 70-degree temps here in Nebraska. Wow. Couldn't ask for a more beautiful day out here. It gets a little chilly in the morning, a little brisk, but it's nice. So it's the next day now, and we've got the boards all glued up here. So we're going to start working with this. We're going to start cutting some trim boards to go underneath, and then we'll trim this thing up to the width that we need. We'll probably do that first. But it's looking good. We got on another project yesterday while we were waiting for the glue to dry, and didn't get back to this one. But depending on when this gets posted, could be yesterday's video is what we were doing in between. So let's get on this. So we've got our saw guide clamped on here. Our saw blade is 5 inches to the edge of the blade to the table. So that's why we have 5 inches from here, from the shortest point of our board. This is longer over here. So we're going to run the saw right along here to give us a nice square edge right here. We marked over 5 inches on the shortest point, and then took our big framing square and made a straight line all the way across it square. And then we clamped that edge right along that line. And now we're going to cut this off. So we've got that side cut off. If you remember, we need 6 feet. So we measured from this end down here 5'7", which is 5 inches short of 6 feet. And then we're going to square this end off. Now when you're cutting something off like this, it's helpful to always make sure the larger side of your saw table is on the part that's not going to fall away. So you want your larger side of your saw table over here. This is only about 1.5 inches here. And if we turn the saw around and came back this way, our gap or space here would need to be different. But that you can imagine that little 1.5 inches is hard to keep flat. Whereas the wider part of the table you can keep nice and flat on this wood. So we've got this thing cut the size. We're a little bit more than 19 inches what we need, but we may just leave that. So we're going to start thinking about the frame on the bottom. So the next operation we did, we took our 2x6, we trued up one edge, and then we set our table saw at 1.5 inches, and we cut these strips down to 1.5 inches that we're going to use for the molding underneath. It's going to slide over the existing hearth, and we're going to make a special notch in the bottom of it or behind it to slide over the existing top that's already tapered on the edge, and we'll show you how we're going to do that. So back to our existing hearth. It's all cleaned off right now because Kelly just took down her fall decorations, getting ready to put up Christmas. So this is the profile of the top. So if you look at the square, if we cut like on a 45-degree angle, our molding will go underneath that. And then to the bottom of that top portion is about 7/8 of an inch thick. So we know that measurement as well. And we've already measured the outside diameter of this, so we know what that is also. So we can go out and start working with that molding. So we picked out our best piece and we cut it at 6 feet because that's a little bit longer than what we need, but we know we have what we need. So I'm going to take this piece here, and what we're going to do is make a sample piece of molding that we can go in and kind of test fit on the existing hearth to make sure what we're doing is going to work. It's going to work. We're just going to have to tweak it to where we get it right. And I'm going to do that with the spare wood, not with the wood we want to use, obviously. All right, this is what we've come up with. If you look at the end of the board here, we're going to cut away the dark portion. And then we're going to screw this underneath our board that we made in the proper location in this orientation. And the outer edge of the current mantle will be here. And then this 45-degree angle down here will hook underneath the existing mantle, thus holding our new mantle on top to where it won't tip and fall off. And then we'll either screw or nail down from the top or screw up from the bottom to hide the screws into our existing board. So that's the plan. We're going to get our rip fence up here, and we need to get really precise. So we're going to use our little square to make sure our blade height is good and our width is good and all that. It's a little easier to use one of these than it is a tape measure. So we're going to get set up for our first cut, which I believe I'll make this straight cut first. With basically we're leaving about a half of this width. So I'll measure to one side of the blade. Remember, you got to account for the blade width. And we'll make this first cut at the proper height and the proper distance from the fence. Okay, we are exactly 1.5 inches wide. And you can see my mark's not perfectly in the center because I was just kind of getting an idea what we're going to do. But we want this to be split right in half. So to achieve that, you have to account for the blade width. So from the table, we measured 3/4 to the outside of the blade. So when you account for the saw cut, you're going to have 3/4 of an inch to the edge of your mark. And that's right where we want to be, and that'll make this directly in half. So now we have to figure out the blade height. Okay, now that we've got our width set, we got to account for our depth. Remember that our current mantle is 7/8 of an inch thick. So we've made our cut about a 1/16 above 7/8, which would be 15/16 thereabouts. And that's what we're going to go for. It's going to be snug, but not too tight to where you can't get it over. So we're going to cut this board, and then we'll work on that 45 cut. All right, I already screwed up. I got a little cocky thinking I had this thing licked, but I wasn't paying attention to the orientation of my wood. I want the rough edge showing. I don't want the clean edge showing because that would be a discoloration. This would all be light. Yes, I could stain that darker, but it's too even of a color. I need this rough edge to show. So luckily for me, all is not lost. So what I'll do, instead of coming in here with the 45 and meeting this corner and then cutting this piece out, I'm going to move the 45 over to where it just meets this corner, and it's going to come up and meet a little bit over here, and then we'll cut this piece out and we'll leave just a little bit of that little rabbit in there. So we're a little beefier here. So when we screw through, we have a little more meat. Otherwise we'd get pretty narrow right here. So I'm going to set up the saw to do the 45 because it'll be easier to do now that we still have this square block. And then we'll come back through and cut this piece out later. It'll be a little bit easier than doing the 45. Okay, we've got all our pieces ran through. Got that 45 cut. Byproduct, you got a lot of corner molding if you ever need it. So our next operation is we're going to turn the blade back at a 90. And we're going to cut this portion here off. So we'll be back. When you're resetting your saw to 90, make sure you use a square. That way you know your blade is exactly 90. These little pointer things down here, they'll come close, but to be exact, you need to use a square. Make sure you're not on a tooth because the teeth are wider, so go in between the teeth. And then make sure you got no air gap in there. And then there's a tightening deal here that you tighten up to hold it in place if you didn't know that. The good thing about a table saw is it's like having your own little mini lumber mill. You can make molding and do all kinds of stuff with it. So if you're going to decide which piece of woodworking equipment you're going to get and try to prioritize, this should be your #1 priority because you can do so much with a table saw. And get one with a cast iron deck. The newer Craftsman table saws have a stamped out sheet metal deck. This one's cast iron all the way through and holds nice and true. But they're hard to come by. This is an older model. So you get what you pay for with these table saws. All right, we've taken our test piece into the house and we dry fitted it against the old or the existing mantle. And it fits perfectly. Should have dry fit it the first time before we started cutting everything, and we would have noticed our problem before we cut all those. But this, holding it up there, this sticks above the rail about a 1/16 of an inch, which gives us a little bit of play, which is fine. That's what we want. So now that we got this, we're going to cut all these and we'll start doing the assembly. All right, we got all our pieces cut. This one didn't get quite all the way cut because we hit a nail in there. I don't know if you can see it. Oh, right there on the end. Right where the saw blade stopped. But another byproduct, we got a bunch of square stock now, used for something. If not, just kindling in the old wood stove. So we're going to start cutting these pieces of length and get them laid out and screwed together on our top board. All right, our current hearth is 66 inches wide. But you got to remember, you can't measure to here because this is the outer diameter. The hearth is going to go right here to this edge. So we need 66 inches, and I'm going just like 66 and a 1/16 or a little more from this edge to this edge, the short point of the 45 on this area. And remember, it's going to sit like this. This will be the underside, and our current hearth will come to right here, and this will go up underneath the decorative molding that's there now. So we have our long piece cut. Now we need to cut our short pieces. Now our end pieces need to be 16.5 inches from this point right here to a flat cut, straight cut on the end, because this is the back. So we don't need an angle back there. But our long piece will go in between these two pieces and look like that when we're done. All right, we've ascertained that the top is down here underneath, and that's going to be the front. So our long piece goes in the front, and our side pieces go over here. All we have to do is flush these side pieces on this side, make sure they're square, and we have the same distance here and down there, and we can start screwing this thing together. I'm going to countersink my screws in here and pre-drill, so we're not splitting any of this. However, I do have 3 more pieces over there if I need to cut one. The only thing I can't replace is this long 6-footer. So we're going to be careful putting this together. So we got our molding all screwed together. We used our square to put the ends on, but we also verified that we still had 66 inches on the inside between those two ends, and we have about 66 and a 16th to an 1/8, which will be just fine. So before we start cleaning this thing up and doing some sanding and stuff like that, I'm going to take it in the house and I'm going to dry fit it to make sure we don't have any issues. Well, she slipped on perfectly like it was made to go on here. Looks beautiful. I already love it already, that barnwood color. And then we got the barnwood molding underneath. So we're going to go out in the shop and sand this up. Get some of the splinters out of it. I got a giant splinter trying to carry this thing in the house. But we're going to make it user friendly. And see you back out in the shop. So we are going to sand all the corners, and for that I'm going to use my 4.5-inch grinder with an 80 grit flapper wheel, and it's just going to ease everything, take all the splinters off. And to this imperfect project, I'm going to add some imperfections as I go with this sander. So if I get a little notch like this, I may take it a little bit deeper, and the edge is going to be kind of roughed up a little bit. Won't be such a straight corner. I'll show you when I'm done. Alright, we got this side sanded, which is the bottom side. I eased all these edges all the way around because these were super sharp corners here. We knocked those off. We've softened the corners all the way around this thing. And then I also did kind of a test run on the main surface. So I went over this with the sander. And I've done this before, so I knew what it would do. It really accentuates the old wood, because the dark down deep in the crevices stays dark, and then the upper part lightens up a little bit, and it just looks beautiful when you're done. Another thing I've done before is I'll take one of those, it's a wheel that's got sandpaper all the way around it that kind of flaps. Let me find one, hold on. So this is what it looks like right here. It's got sandpaper on the inside, and this little brush stuff supports the sandpaper as it goes around. And you turn it, if the stuff gets short, you turn it and more paper comes out. But you put this in a drill and it runs on the surface, and what it does is the soft part of the wood comes out, and the harder part of the wood stays. So you get, it really brings out the grain in it, and you can feel the grain. Really cool when you use one of these. I've done that before too on little like boxes and stuff that I've made, little curio boxes and little trinket boxes. Having that wood grain in there is just beautiful. So we're going to flop this over and ease the corners on the other side and do the top. And then we're going to do some hand sanding. We'll probably get some 180 grit and start with that and see if I can find any splinters that need to be taken out and sanded down, any rough portions, like down deep in that, still a little rough in there, but when I hand sand, that'll actually come out. So that's what's next, and we'll bring you back when we're done. Now another thing I wanted to show you, this table, you can tell, is not flat. It's got kind of a rise on one side, this one corner. But that's all right, because the way we made it, it slips over the hearth that's there already, and it's perfectly flat. And as it slips over, this one straightens right out and lays flat. So that's not going to be a problem. All right, my friends, this is what she looks like. I haven't done any hand sanding yet, but this is just absolutely gorgeous wood. Kelly is going to love this because I love it. Not because I love it, but I know she's going to love it because I know my wife. But you can see all the imperfections that we accentuated as we sanded. If it was, in fact, we're going to get back in here and do this one a little more too. We're going to gouge that out and make a little divot in there. But any place where there's like a little divot, you get that sander in there and gouge it out. You can see the imperfections. This looks like a 100-year-old dining table. So if you were to make a table like this and use this technique, it would come out just gorgeous, and you'd be able to sell the darn thing for $1,000 probably. We got a knot that's free floating in here, and what I'm going to do so we don't lose it, I'm going to get some of that expanding glue, and we'll put some in here, and then I will get like some masking tape and tape this so it stays in place. And then once that glue expands and hardens, we'll hit the top of this again because it's going to squeeze out. We'll hit the top of it again with that 4.5-inch sander and take all that squeeze out gone, but then we won't lose that knot. This one's fine. But yeah, we even had a screw come through right here. We just sanded it flush. No big deal. There's nail holes all over this thing. It looks like a very well-used table. But that's what she looks like. If it was up to me, I'd put a nice gloss finish on this, but Kelly will not want that. If anything, she'll probably put a matte finish on here, which will darken and accentuate the grain a little bit, but it's not going to add a shine, but it will seal it. And anytime you seal wood projects like this, a lot of people don't seal the bottom because it's not going to show, but you need to seal all the way around your project, top, bottom, sides, everything, because if it absorbs moisture at a different rate, which it will be, because the part that's sealed won't absorb it and the part that's underneath will, it'll cause cupping. So anytime you see cupping, it's unequal moisture absorption or dehydration. That's why, like outside siding boards, you'll see cupped out because the sun's hitting them on the outside, drying them out severely, whereas underneath the moisture doesn't come out as much and it causes the siding to cup, and that's what causes it. But that's where she is. We hope you've enjoyed this project. I have. Looks good. We love you guys. Let me turn around so you can get some light from the outside. Stay safe, stay healthy. Come back and see us here on Mark Kelly Farm. Bye.